What's up everybody and welcome back to the channel. In this video for the First Descendant today, we're going to be looking at a mobbing build, a setup for Freyna, which is exceptionally good at dealing with mobbing based content. Season 3 was further on pushed out into August, so we know that we have the entire July still left to spend time farming Sigma Sector. Of course, everybody's still trying to hunt down mutant cells and all that. And I'm kind of like been passing over all of my Descendants, essentially freshening them up with all of the new things which have recently been added. Like for example, mutant cells, as I've mentioned, but also external components being moddable now, which opens up a lot of the builds to not having to stack as much HP or defense specifically on the mods themselves on your Descendant, because you're actually getting it from your external components, which means in some cases you can load more damage into your Descendants, which is always, you know, super awesome. Now, generally speaking, you guys know that if you follow the channel, I'm a huge Innes fan, so I kind of like use her for all my mobbing content, but that's not to say that Freyna is any slouch in this department. Long before Innes was around, Freyna was kind of like the queen of this kind of content, being able to delete massive amounts of enemies, entire rooms at a time. And even though this was nerfed and adjusted to a degree, you can now still get her up to what I would say is a decent power level, where her clear speed is, I would say, very easily comparable to any of the best, including Innes. Now, where Innes actually requires you to press some buttons all the time and things like that, and maybe like, I don't know, like be a little bit more active, Freyna is truly like the fire and forget kind of like Descendant, where essentially because of contagion, you're able to just drop some poison or toxic on the one side of the room, and then it basically carries over all the way to the other side of the room, and you can just refresh it along the way as you go. The reach of this poison is huge, the damage that it deals, the ticks are like super big. And so therefore you're able to just clear out massive amounts of enemies super fast without really having to do much for it, which, let's be honest, after you've done Sigma Sector like a gajillion times, then that's maybe like the kind of thing that you're looking for. So yeah. So in this build today, we're going to be looking specifically at a mobbing setup for Freyna. As I said, there are some things which are obviously similar to the way that Freyna has been before on this channel, but of course we have mutant cells now, and we have the addition of the mods on external components, as well as one or two small changes within the actual mods of the Descendant themselves, which pretty much brings us up to this power level that you're seeing right here on the screen right now. I will also include a short little segment where I will cover a bossing setup for Freyna, but you guys know that I pretty much advocate using the best Descendant for the job, and in this case Freyna is, while she's really competent at destroying a lot of the hard void intercept bosses, the earlier ones, there are definitely better options in terms of Descendants available, which is worth developing specifically for doing this kind of job, meaning like killing like void intercept bosses. So that being said, I will cover that just in case you're like an all-in Freyna kind of guy and you want to make sure that your Freyna is able to do at least, let's say, 75 to 80% of the content. Then I've got you, and this is it. So let's dive in. Alrighty, so starting us off with the Descendant modules first. Essentially, you're trying to target 4 different things here. You want, obviously, damage when you can get it. You also want cooldown reduction, which is super important for us, so that our 1 and our 3, those 2 abilities are available pretty much all the time. And also we want to have Venom Baptism also available when we do need it. So Venom Baptism, in sometimes when you just want to melt a yellow bar down fast and you don't want to use a primary weapon or anything like that, this is a fantastic skill that can just absolutely decimate health bars. And if we can get the cooldown way down, it means you can use it more often, which is also awesome. That being said, Venom Baptism is not the main thing that you'll use. It's just like extra cream on the top. The main abilities which you'll be using, which is pretty much what deals all of your damage and what does all your clears, is Venom Trauma and of course Putrid Venom. Now Venom Trauma, see that as the smaller one that you use more often. It has less range and so on, and then but has more damage. And then of course you have pretty much like your bigger AoE, which has a slightly longer cooldown, although with this build not much, and then essentially also hangs around a lot longer, so it has a much longer duration, and that's Putrid Venom. So as I said, you want to be targeting damage, you want to be targeting skill cooldown, you also want range, because you want, when the toxic deploys, you want it to be spaced across as big an area as possible. And then of course you also want it to last as long as possible, which is where duration comes in. So first and foremost, your Transcendent mod that you're going to be using is Contagion. Contagion is what makes this build work. It's not to say that you wouldn't see sexy numbers and good toxic damage without it, but Contagion is what essentially stretches the poison out, because it creates a bigger radius that the poison can travel, and therefore that the toxic can affect more enemies and essentially spread faster, killing more enemies. All right, now starting us off, let's look at pretty much, let's go category by category, right? So let's talk about skill cooldown mods first, right? MP conversion is really, really good for us here because it gives us massive skill cooldown at negative 36.5%, although it does also slightly decrease our max MP, which is not really a problem with this particular build or with Freyna as a Descendant, because your skills really do put in a lot of work. You don't have to refresh them as often, and of course there are blue bricks getting dropped all over the place from the enemies that you kill, so you can just have those refreshed. Nimble Fingers is of course an auto include as well for skill cooldown, because this is another negative 25.6%. And then the two focus mods are really good for us here, because not only do they give us damage in terms of tech skill power modifier as well as toxic skill power, but they also each give us skill cooldown of negative 6.1%. Okay, so now we have those covered, we can look over to our two amplification mods. These pretty much just give us raw power, so the toxic amplification giving us toxic skill power plus 65.4%, although it does crush our critical hit damage, and then tech amplification doing the same thing for tech skill power modifier with an increase to that, but also crushing our skill critical hit rate. So therefore we're not focusing on crit with this build. I think that's pretty obvious from what we're seeing here already, but we're basically going for raw power, and that's pretty much it. Next thing we can do is we can go for our range. Skill expansion is super good here, because this is a massive range increase for us at 92.3%. and then we also have skill extension, which is a skill duration plus 36.5%. so those two blue mods helping us out with duration and range. Now you'll notice that there's no HP mods on here, and that's because of what I said about being able to mod our external components. So I used to have an HP mod in this build, and it was actually in this position here where spear and shield is. In this case now we replace HP rolls with spear and shield, which does give us defense, so it is still a defensive module, but it also gives us skill power plus 8.1%, which is just, additional damage on top. And then last but not least, our golden mod that we use is of course Decimator. Decimator says that when you defeat an enemy inflicted with a debuff, toxic is considered a debuff, your skill power modifier plus 5 per defeated enemy for 10 seconds up to 10 stacks, so you can get a 50% increase to your skill power modifier, because of course the enemies are going to have toxic on them when they die, and so therefore this will pretty much be full the entire time as long as you are murdering enemies with your toxic. Now this means that when we look at our skills here, we can see that our first skill drops all the way from an 11 second to a 2.2 second cooldown, and then we also see that it has a bigger radius from 4 to 9, and it has a higher duration from 4 seconds to 5.6 seconds. Alright, then when we look at our Putrid Venom, we can see that this drops all the way from 20 seconds down to 4 seconds, which is a huge reduction. It means that this skill is available pretty much kind of like all the time, and especially if you consider the fact that its duration is 16.7 seconds, it means that you will be able to refresh this like 4 times before the first one originally expires. Of course, it's not how it works. My point is just that you have so severely crushed your cooldown that your duration far overlaps the need to actually refresh it regularly. And then, of course, the range also goes from 4 to 9 meters. And then, as I've mentioned, your Venom Baptism, which is your change your gun into a fucking toxic gun skill, essentially goes all the way down from 110 seconds down to 22 seconds. This skill does a shitload of damage, kind of like to yellow bars, no matter if you actually have a weapon that's specifically made for it, that is made to use for it, like, for example, the boss version of Freyna. So it is a good way for you to melt yellow bars if you don't have a weapon necessarily that can do it. And in some cases, we have to also remember that people that are playing Descendants might not have, they might not have fully developed, like, Malevolence or something like that, whichever weapon which is really good at AoE clearing, and so therefore this can be a good weapon to just use to melt down the yellow bars that don't necessarily die so fast to your poison ticks. And even though I'm sure you've seen in the footage, it's not like these poison ticks aren't absolutely demolishing them as well. Now, the next thing is what we can look at is we can talk about weapons. Now, because this is a skill-based your Descendant setup, you don't really need to even be running around with a weapon in your hand. However, there are benefits to having certain weapons. The first one that I'll talk about is Malevolent. I like Malevolent pretty much on every Descendant that I do AoE content with, and that's simply, mobbing content with, and that's simply because it's a mobbing weapon. It's a fantastic way for you to be able to deal AoE damage even on a non-AoE Descendant. Now, this is an AoE Descendant, the build that we're looking at here, so this is like Overkill Deluxe, but nonetheless, Malevolent can also help you to demolish, like, you know, packs if, like, for some fucking reason you've run out of mana or, you know, something like that. Now, I have dedicated build videos for Malevolent, several of them actually on the channel, and I haven't changed these builds much since I've made those. I will flash the setup that I use here. So this is the multi-strike setup, and it actually has poison as an element as well. So that means that the enemies that you do hit will also get toxic on them, and that will also just further poison them down, so alongside the other bullshit. So yeah, this is the setup that I use for it. Like I said, I have a dedicated video for Malevolent on the channel, so please go ahead and look at that if you want a in-depth explanation as to why I use each one of these mods, but that's pretty much it here. Now, if you want to use another weapon which is pretty much really good on Freyna because of its ultimate ability, then I would highly recommend Secret Garden. Now, Secret Garden is very much a stat stick for Freyna, right? Because what it does is it makes her tech abilities deal more damage. And if you have a look, you'll see that her first skill is a tech ability, her third skill is a tech ability, and oh my god, you guessed it, her fourth skill is a tech ability as well. So Secret Garden just pretty much empowers all of the damage that she deals. So it's a fantastic weapon to just have in your arms and run around with. You don't need any fucking mods on it, anything like that. The gun is just good just carrying around in your hands. However, if you do want to, and I can quickly just change to maybe here, okay, if you do want the weapon itself to also deal damage when you shoot with it, this is a build for it that I can highly recommend. Again, like I said, you can show up with a completely fucking empty Secret Garden, and it will still empower all of your tech abilities. However, if you want the weapon itself to also deal damage when you shoot at enemies, then I would recommend this. This is a really good setup for Secret Garden. It has like 70% critical hit rate with 100% critical hit damage increase. So when you hit enemies with this gun, it will absolutely chunk them down. So it's just really good for that. All right. So then if we pretty much, I think the next thing would be to just look at reactors and external components. And then we'll swing back to inversion reinforcements. We'll talk about arc tuning and all of that other stuff. With a reactor, the sky's the limit here. The only thing that you shouldn't have on is additional damage to Colossus. I would say that's like a definite no-no because we're not fighting with Colossi in this build itself. However, I went for maximum, I would say, damage here in terms of the fact that I'm stacking in my two substats additional tech skill power as well as additional toxic skill power, right? Of course, we're using a toxic mechanics reactor because we want it to be toxic and tech because those are our damage profiles. And then, of course, make sure that your optimization condition is whichever weapon you're holding your gun. So if you're in your hand, so if you're running around with a Secret Garden, make sure it's scout rifle. If you're running around with Malevolent, make sure it's, you know, hand cannon, just to make sure that you're getting that additional 60%. Otherwise, if you're running around with a, you know, unoptimized reactor, you're losing like 60% of your damage, which is just not worth it at all. All right. Then with your external components, Plague, the Plague set was added. If you do not have the Plague set, Slayer is still fucking great. It has always been. But Plague is just better for Freyna, in my opinion. And that's because it actually focuses obviously directly into Toxic, which is her element of choice. Now, in terms of the mods that you're looking for on, and so these are the that you can mod onto the external components now. Like you can see there, I have max HP and defense on there. Those are the roles you want. You want max HP on all four, as you can see, and you want defense on all four. Now, you can see that my shit is scuffed, like none of it's like decent rolls, nothing like that. I literally just rolled the most, you know, like the first roll onto everything and kept it, which I think just further illustrates the need, because again, all the footage that you've been seeing running in the background has been me running this. We haven't gone down, we don't suffer for survivability, anything like that. So this is just really good for making sure that we stay in the fight, we don't go down, but we have the maximum amount of damage available. You can see that basically the stats that we end up with is like 7,000 HP, which is, it's not fucking great, but that could be better by me having an HP roll on here instead of DBNO duration, right? But we could probably get to something like, I don't know, maybe like 8,500, 9,000, which would obviously be better, right? But the point is, we have 53,000 armor, well, defense. So we have a massive amount of damage reduction, which that in conjunction with your HP is why we don't go down. So it's just, you know, phenomenal. Now, in terms of your substat rolls that you want on your 4 pieces of Plague, right? You want MP recovery out of combat, and you want HP on your auxiliary power. You do not want DBNO duration. This is literally, guys, you will not believe the luck that I've had in trying to farm this shit. Obviously, I'm waiting for my HP and my MP recovery out of combat roll, but the point is you want that on it, right? Then in terms of your sensor, this is the most important part of your gear, because it essentially makes it so that you never have to worry about MP and you can just keep throwing the fucking toxic out. Is you want max MP on there, and you want MP recovery in combat. Then when it comes to your memory, what you want on here is defense, and MP recovery modifier is fine. Basically you want MP recovery modifier on there, and then pretty much there's a couple of other things which are okay. Shield recovery in combat is it's also not great. Like I said, defense and MP recovery modifier is your 2 rolls that you want here. Now the MP recovery modifier on here actually makes the MP recovery out of combat as well as the MP recovery in combat actually perform better, and that's why it's just so good. And then last but not least, on your processor, it doesn't really matter though. You can have some toxic resistance on here if you want, max shield and shield recovery modifier. I don't know, if you just want to lean into that, I kind of like just went like, fuck it, like I've already got shield recovery in combat on here, as well as, you know, max shield recovery modifier on here, so at least my shield's getting a little bit of boon from that. But the processor in the grand scheme of things doesn't really matter. If you're really pressed, go for like max shield toxic, or, you know, some toxic resistance, something like that. So that essentially then covers that. Let's quickly talk about Arche Tuning. Arche Tuning board. I would say this is kind of like the standard skill-based damage setup in a way. Pretty much what we're doing is we're rolling down here. We're picking up as much skill power as we can. We get our enhanced skill cost reduction over here, which is nice. We get our skill effect range over here, which is also nice. We pick up our yellow node here, or golden node, I guess, if you want to be that guy, with some more skill power there. We go all the way up here. We pick up some MP nodes here. We go all the way here to get some more skill duration. And we go all the way up here to get some more skill cooldown, and then we dip all the way up here so that we can slap in a mutant cell. And of course, the mutant cell that we want to be putting in here is Toxin Cohesion, because what this does is it says that when you defeat an enemy, you have a chance to grant this effect to yourself, Toxin Cohesion. It's a 50% trigger rate, so it's really pretty high. It's a, like, you know, 1 in 2 chance of fucking happening. It has a 10-second duration. It can stack 3 times, and what that does is per stack it increases your toxic skill power by 6.4%. So basically you get almost close to 20% additional skill power, toxic skill power, when you have all 3 stacks running, which is just, you know, super dope. Then, oops, I did not show inversion reinforcements. Again, this is kind of like my standard setup for inversion reinforcements for anything in Sigma, and that's because I always run around with Malevolent. So you have Malevolent, and you take evolutionary cutting mechanism, you know, which is this over here, gives us 2 more fucking, you know, bladed cogs. Then we also pick up biodensity augmentation, which gives us max HP. So again, even though we only have 7,000 HP, this will give us a little bit more survivability as we are defeating enemies, which surely you do with a AoE mobbing setup. And then I run chill focus rounds here, because when you shoot enemies with Malevolent, it can actually freeze them in place, and then because of the chill effect of the weapon, and then they obviously, when enemies are frozen in place, they can't get to you, deal damage to you. So, you know, that's all good. If you are not using Malevolent, right, there's no reason for you to take evolutionary cutting mechanism, so therefore obviously rather take something like Adrenaline Rush, because this just gives you like more movement speed, which means you'll be going from room to room faster, which is obviously also great. Quantum Domain is fantastic because we pick something up in this row, so it's going to give us some more range and some more skill power, and this is for every time you cast a skill up to 15 stacks, and then you pretty much have those stacks for the entire remainder of the activity, which is great. We also have Crisis Response System because we pick up biodensity augmentation, and then last but not least we also have some additional stuff here for our enhanced focus rounds, which doesn't really matter all that much. So I think that's pretty much it. I think I've covered every single thing. Now, just before I let you go, let me just quickly show you, if you would wanting to use this you wanted to use Freyna to actually do some void intercept bosses, and at least I would say the first couple of bosses up until Gluttony, something like that. That means, let me just quickly switch to here, and so this is then the setup that I would use for that. I am not going to go through all of the different mods and all of that stuff. Like I said, I actually have a dedicated build video for this where I explain my decisions for all of the mods and why I choose them the way that I do. And that video is of course on the channel, but I do also just want to flash this as part of this video in case you don't want to go clicking around and looking for stuff. So pretty much what you want to be using here is you want to be using Venom Injection. So this is the skill that changes your second ability so that essentially you deal more damage, so you get pretty much a skill power increase here. And then essentially this is built in the way where let me show you here, Overwhelming Shield is the star of the build here, because basically what we're doing is we're reducing our HP to 1, and then we're stacking as much as possible HP so that it actually empowers our shield and gives us a massive amount of shield. What that then does is it gives us like a shield of like 11,000, and of course that's without me having augmented any of these external components here to essentially give me more HP and more defense, which would also translate into more shield in this particular case. But this is the bossing setup that I use for. Again, I hardly ever use her for bossing, since there are other Descendants who can just do it far more efficiently. But this setup here allows you to use her fourth ability and essentially melt down these Void Intercept bosses in one rotation. You'll see that the cooldown is 95.8 seconds. I'm going to leave the screen open like this for a little while longer so you can see all the mods. And then I also just want to show you the setup for Secret Garden, because in this case, again, you're using Secret Garden as a stat stick. So what you're using is you're using fire rate up, you're using your magazine increases, and you're using sharp precision shot, because those are the only things that carry over once you activate her fourth ability, right? Once you activate the gun changing ability. Now you might be saying, hold on, but tactical rifles don't benefit from sharp precision shot. You're right. They do not, because it's considered letting go of the trigger even if you hold it in, like the mod suggests. However, remember that when she activates her fourth ability, it's not a tactical rifle anymore. It's actually like pretty much like an AR, and so therefore you do benefit from sharp precision shot, and so therefore you do get that additional effect there, which is the fire rate increase as well as the firearm attack increase. So these are the only 4 mods that matter for that. These are the only stats that carry over onto the weapon when you activate the fourth. So it's your magazine, making sure that you have the maximum amount of rounds available, and then of course that you shoot as fast as possible and just dump your entire payload over on the enemy. It makes sense to have a reactor that has additional damage to Colossi, and in my case I have skill cooldown here, which means that I could, for instance, mod further into that and pretty much get my fourth ability back more regularly if I wanted multiple rotations, like for example if you're fighting on Deathstalker or if you're in a group. And that's pretty much it. That is your bossing setup if you do want to use Freyna. Again, like I said, in terms of the bosses that you can probably comfortably do with this setup and not have to worry about more than one rotation is, like I said, all the way up to Gluttony. Gluttony is doable, however you have to catch it just right in terms of like hitting all the crit spots, everything like that. And then I would say it's like 1 out of every 3 times I'm able to do that. But again, like I said, it's important that we use the right Descendants for the right job, and in this particular case I think Freyna is perfectly suited for just demolishing massive amounts of enemies in as fast as possible, getting you those AoE clears super fast, and that's pretty much what we use her for. And that's going to be it for the video. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know in the comments down below which Descendants you would like me to target next. I'm pretty much back, so you'll be seeing more regular videos from me. I know I've said that like 2 or 3 times now, but as you can see, we're really in like a new space now. So I'm busy rolling these out now, and as soon as I get mutant cells, I slap them into the builds, I upgrade them, and then I bring a video out. So I've got another 2 that are coming out either tomorrow or the day thereafter, and then the day thereafter, so later in the week. But I'm working on these as we go. So let me know in the comments down below which Descendants you'd like me to prioritize. And as always, thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Fucking cheers.